Hello folks, it's Isabel here. Hope everyone's doing well. Today I wanted to come on and join in with the recent VR that was started by Simon at the Hermit's Cave around most overlooked decks. Interestingly, when I then watched some of the others, I realised that another tarot tuber, so Marine at Waves of Your Soul, had done a similar VR a couple of months ago. So it was a similar tag a couple of months ago. So this is basically a response to both of those ideas of overlooked decks. Just want to have a little chat before we start to kind of talk about where my brain was at, and then I will show you some decks. I'm also taking a slight liberty because I decided to look at both my tarot and oracle collections. So it's really interesting this. I don't have as big a collection as some people. I probably have more than I should have for a person who isn't practicing as much as others. But I certainly don't have, I have probably, well, I've probably got either up to 100 tarot and oracle, thereabouts, maybe not even 100 in total. And so I've been in this community, probably COVID was the kind of kicking point. I've always had a slight interest in this kind of thing, but it was really around COVID. And so sorry, what am I trying to say? I'm a bit like this at the moment, so apologies. My brain just tends to go a little bit fuzzy. I haven't decided if it's my age or if it's as a result of the COVID I had a couple of years ago that's having an effect. So I was thinking about this idea of overlooked decks. At the moment, I could say that a large proportion of my decks are overlooked. In fact, the majority of them are overlooked. They are not being used very effectively. But what I've realised, and I was watching Deanne from Blue Crescent Tarot, her response, and I'm in a similar situation in that I am a working mother. And so I don't have a lot of time to do anything with my decks, my study, my practice. I don't have a regular spiritual practice. I really would like to do something, but also I don't have, as I've said a few times, I don't have a tarot space. I have my desk where I'm sat at now, where I'm working, or various spaces in the house, but all of these spaces are fairly open to other people. If I wanted to be in my bedroom, I'd have to take a lot of stuff up there. If I wanted to, I don't have desk space, for example, or table space in my bedroom. And so when I'm recording videos, when I'm studying, there's always people around. Friday is the only day where they're not here, but I tend to have 3,000,001 other things to do. So I've already spent a few hours this morning planning something for this weekend, which is a voluntary thing. So one of my issues is that a lot of my collection is already overlooked for that reason, for the reason that I'm very busy. I am finding it hard to sit down and use the cards for anything constructive or to just enjoy them. However, that being said, when I did watch back, I wasn't in the live, but when I watched back Simon's video where he introduced this tag, there were 3 decks that leapt to mind straight away. And it made me realise that the other thing I'm guilty of, particularly again recently, and it goes in ebbs and flows, and I've noticed that when I look back at my records, so I keep a spreadsheet of my tarot decks and I record when I've ordered or when I bought, it's always this time of year that I tend to go on a little bit of a buying spree. So I find that I suddenly have the urge for something new, or I've watched a particularly large number of videos that have kind of triggered this sense of needing to buy things or wanting something different, wanting something new. And so I have got a couple of decks in that I want to share that have come in perhaps over the last few months, not even the last few weeks. Well, yeah, since Christmas, I've got some stuff in. And one that I've had for a few months and not opened. And I realise that sometimes I kind of go, oh, I need something fresh, I need something new. And rather than going to the decks I've got and going, right, let's look at these again, I will go and get something else. And actually one of the things I've been trying to do is be more discerning. So if I see something and think, right, I'm going to buy that, before I do, I actually stop and look at what I've got and think, is it something different, or am I just getting something that's very similar to something else? So that's a little bit of waffling before we start. So basically I very quickly chose 3 of my tarot decks. The other 2 took a bit longer, but they're all decks that I basically haven't used in readings for a long time, bearing in mind that my journey only really goes back to perhaps the summer of, I think probably the summer of 2020, so it was COVID summer, my first tarot deck coming around autumn of that year. So you know, these are decks that maybe they're not quite the 3 years mark as some of Simon's were, but they still haven't been used for a while, and I'll talk a bit more about them. I also, however, just after having watched the video the other day, I had a slight mishap. I have a lot of my decks in crates, as I might have shown in some videos. I had my crate of Oracle decks out, and unfortunately I had a cup of coffee that went everywhere. So on Sunday I ended up with like literally the majority of my Oracle decks out, spread all over the floor. Most of them I managed to dry off with very little effect. There's one deck that has had a bad effect to the gilding, which means that I probably won't be able to sell it on if I wanted to, or if I did, it would be at a very reduced cost. Another one was in one of Kelly Bear's little pouches, and unfortunately the pouch took the brunt of the coffee. The deck itself, because I whipped it out really quickly, is fine, and there's a couple that have ever so slight little marks on them, but the majority are, and a couple of the books are a little bit squiggly. I'm so annoyed, but also having had that process where I literally had to get all these decks out and get them out of boxes, and the whole floor was covered. My husband was like, what the? That it actually brought me to look at the ones I've not used for a while, and so I decided that actually Oracle is something as well. Recently I've bought quite a few Oracle decks because I was feeling like that was a gap and I wanted to use them a bit more without actually going to my collection and going, well, why don't I just use that one? So that's me doing my ramble. So we're going to go through 5 tarot and 5-ish, and you'll see what the ish is, Oracle decks that I consider overlooked. So I haven't used for quite some time, and talk about perhaps why, or if at all, but that I still, and these are all decks that I still think I want in my collection, or perhaps I need to review as part of this process. So let's start with the tarot. The first tarot that I thought of, in fact it was the tarot I thought of instantly, was the Forest of Enchantment. I've had this on a couple of videos. This is one of my early decks. I fell in love with the artwork, and every time I see it on someone's channel, I remember how much I love the artwork, basically. I love the pictures, I love the storytelling. However, there were a few issues with this deck. So I still absolutely love the artwork, not a problem at all. However, there were a few issues. There's a bit of a backstory around this deck, which I'm not going to go into in terms of misprint, new copy, blah, blah, blah. I think, and so the issue with this deck is when I first used it, I was trying really, really hard to work intuitively. And, you know, I really love pictures like this. I adore that picture. I think that is a gorgeous picture. Another one, love that picture as well, and that representation, that is a gorgeous representation of the Green Mother instead of the Empress. I'm just going to bring the cards up a little bit so you can see. Forest Lord, gorgeous. So a lot of the major arcana, absolutely fine. The problem, if I'm perfectly honest, comes when we hit the minor arcana. So a lot of you know this deck, and if you don't, this deck has 4 differently named suits, and they are Visions, Boons, B-O-O-N-S, Challenges, and Spells. And this is where I hit a problem. As a fairly new to tarot person when I got this deck, and someone who was exploring the sense of intuitive reading, I could not at all wrap my head around those cards. And even though it has a fantastic guidebook and I could instantly go to that guidebook and see what the Fairy Challenges was about, I was at a point where I was determined to read intuitively. And so the problem came particularly, for example, with boons. Not a word that I know very well, so it doesn't conjure an image for me. I know that I can't even remember which suit it is now, so I'd have to go back and look at the book, and apologies to those that do know. But then when I looked at some of these cards, is it Pentacles, boons? Do you know what? This was a card in particular, to be honest. This card I pulled on one of those occasions, and I sat here for ages going, well, I don't really know what to make of it. And it really put me off because I was trying so hard with these decks to understand the intuitiveness and to read it intuitively with this deck, that I became so wrapped up in that I totally could not understand what was going on. I don't think I spent a lot of time necessarily reading the book because I was so keen to get into using the deck. What has then happened is that every time I've thought about using it, or it's come up in a video, I've gone, oh, I love that deck, I've got it in my collection, but actually I'm too scared to go back and use it because I feel like I need to study it and I need to spend time with it. And I can't go to a deck that is differently labelled. I need a deck at the moment where I understand what the suits are and what's going on. I know kind of wands, swords. I know the RWS system a little bit more. I know a little bit about the kind of the meanings in terms of intellect, earth, money, wealth, all those kind of associated meanings, and I find it really hard to implement to this. So to me, this needs too much time and too much headspace to work with. I don't want it to go anywhere. I don't think now is the time for me to work with it. It will remain in my collection because I still adore the artwork, but it is one of my most overlooked for the very reason that it was too challenging when I got it, and it scared me to go back to it, and I need the time to go back. So Forest of Enchantment Tarot. Another one is my very first deck, and that is the Vivid Journey Tarot, and this is one that I think I might try and work with. When I came to this, having bought my first Oracle deck, the person who I was engaging with at the time, who gave me the desire to want to find tarot decks, had a completely different deck. They didn't have an RWS clone. It was an unusual deck that isn't easy to come by, the Parallel Worlds, which some of you may have. And I knew that I didn't want that deck, but I still wanted something. And I'd had a tarot book, so I knew a little bit. I had the Tina Gong tarot book from Labyrinthos. And so I knew a little bit about kind of what was out there, and I did a little bit of research. And it was just the case that at this time, this was available in a bookshop that I'd visited that had an online store for a very respectable price. So I went and bought this, the Vivid Journey Tarot. So again, it is another big box tarot with the thin kind of Llewellyn cards. I have brought this up in a video once or twice, and to be honest, I've never thought of parting with this deck because it was my first deck. And I still think it retains an awful lot of the symbolism. I really love that Empress card that's on the front of the box. I'm a big fan of Empress cards that don't necessarily show somebody as pregnant, because I see the Empress energy as a nurturing Earth Mother type energy, which I love the way that this conveys that. Never sure about that Emperor card. I feel that's a little bit too close to a Hierophant card, but it's fine. Anyway, so I love that Lovers card. The Hermit it's a very stylized deck. It used colour. It's very simple. There's nothing too garish in it. The Devil, maybe some of the cards don't have the right feel. I love the Sun card for its simplicity. There is a real colour palette, as you can see, to the Minors, which really helps. So you've got the kind of reds, the blues, you know, lots of kind of purpley winds and the greens and things. It's a lovely little deck, and it's one that I really ought to work with again. It is totally overlooked because other decks came in that have taken my fancy, and because it's just there, and I almost see it as like, oh, it was my cheap first deck, and sometimes I don't think to go to it. The guidebook isn't that fantastic, to be honest. It is very big for the amount of work that's in it, and I really like people who give you something to chew on, like a question or an affirmation or something. But also it does have some really good information in. So this is a deck that is overlooked because I think because other things are there and I never think to use it. It never thinks to come into my head. So it's one that perhaps I kind of see it as well as a little bit of a summer deck. And what happens in the summer is I tend to go for a very specific deck and forget about the others. But that's the Vivid Journey. So then another deck that then came in my mind as most overlooked and one that I adore is the Tarot of the Abyss. So I bought this as soon as it came out. I'd been following the art. I'd missed out on Bonestone and Earthflesh, but absolutely was following Anna's art. And I bought this deck, and you will see in the oracles the pairing in terms of, I bought the Oracle of Echoes. And for probably the best part of a month, I just used this and the Oracle of Echoes alone. And at that time, it was still coming out of COVID. I think this must have been summer 21. I was using my decks a lot. I was studying. I was really kind of getting into things. And so I used this loads. I love it. I really, really love this deck. And I did a lot of work with it then. And then I've not used it. And I think the reason I've not used it is because I used it so much then. What I then did was kind of go, well, I'm going to use other decks because I've used this one loads. Oh, but I better use other decks because I've used this one tons. And basically kind of went for the whole, well, I don't want to overuse it, or I've got lots of other decks to try, and then I've never come back to it. And it's almost that sense of, because it's something that I've used already and put away, you don't come back to it sometimes. Same with books, almost, that kind of sense of, God, I forgot what that card was like. Sorry, and this is it, isn't it? You know, I've not even looked at this deck for, I'd say months, but actually I'm going to say years. You know, I think I've only occasionally had it out for a video, and even then I probably haven't had it out that much. And like, I've completely forgotten the cards because I haven't had it out. And isn't it amazing how a tag like this, I've noticed as well that if you're doing a response to a VR, a lot of people, you will tend to find the decks you respond with on the whole are decks that are fairly current in your cycle, tend to be the decks that you come to the front of your mind. So I will quite often go straight for decks that are most recent because I haven't looked at these for a while. And this VR, this tag, from whoever made it, this sense of looking back and looking at the decks, and I think a few people have done this, those decks that you've not worked with for a while that you still love, that need to come back to the forefront. I mean, that Tower card, I love that Tower card. And I love the fact with this deck, I was able to, the counter to the Forest of Enchantment was that this deck I really was able to read intuitively. I am not very good at intuitive reading. I will very quickly go for a book or something to help me. And so this was one where I didn't need to do that as much because I was able to get a feel. So this is probably the deck that I've overlooked the most, simply because I used it so much when I first got it, but which I love. And really I need to work with again, and I might bring it out, although I'm trying to work with other decks, and that's the thing, isn't it? You know, you could, you know, how do you make that decision on, well, I need to work with that deck, but actually as myself, where I'm not using decks very much, you know, and then I go and buy another one. Ugh, stupid woman. So then the last two decks I wasn't really sure about. There are quite a lot of decks I haven't used, as I say, but they're ones that I will maybe go to more often. So for example, I was well, no, I won't give examples because you've heard me. And then I found my Anna Kay. Now this one has been in the back of my mind as to whether I want to declutter it. And a couple of times it's come out as a declutter and gone back in my package, in my storage. This deck, I got this deck because I was looking for a Lenormand, and I found that the Lenormand, I loved Anna Kay's Lenormand, and realised that I could get a really lovely tarot deck at the same time. I love the size of this deck. It's a lovely size. It's a really nice size, really nice for me to hold, to work with. And I do really like this deck. However, I think what's happened with this deck is that usually when I try working with this deck, it gives me a kick up the backside. It is, for me, it is quite a heavy-handed deck and tells me like it is. So when I have worked with it, I've had some quite deep, kind of almost negative readings that I didn't like. And what happens when you don't like something? Well, you put it away and go, well, I'm not playing with you then because you're not nice to me. And I think that that is the problem. I think that I'm a bit like the Forest of Enchantment, but for a different reason. I'm scared of it. I'm not prepared to face up to the things that it might tell me. I think it would be good for some shadow work, for some work on those niggly little things. It is a bit unusual, and I have to admit that I don't like some of the faces on some of the cards, and that might be the other reason. I'm fine with some, like for example, I don't like that face. I love the concepts, but that one I don't like. And so some of the cards I don't like very much. I love that sun card. I don't like RWS traditional sun cards with the baby on the horse. Not for me. So I prefer something more like that. So I love lots of the cards, but there are some of the cards that I don't like the faces. I don't like them as much. And I think that this deck has become overlooked because of the readings it has given me when I have worked with it. And I'm scared of it. I just go, well, no, it's also quite dark coloured, and therefore I would tend to be like, I've got other decks. I've got quite a lot of decks in that sort of darker colour category that I tend to associate with autumn and winter, and because I've got quite a few, I then run out of time to use it. I'm still not sure. And what's interesting is I genuinely thought I want to declutter some decks. I've got 3 Oracle on the chopping block and a Tarot. And I genuinely thought I was going to try decluttering this and the Lenormand again. And I've just flicked through it and gone, do you know, I still want to keep it. I must try working with it again. But that's my 4th. And my last overlooked deck, I really didn't know. And then I found my Gil Tarot in my box. I have it in a Kelly pouch. My intention at some point is to cut the borders so that it fits properly. I got this really early on, and at the time I wasn't aware that it was more of a Thoth-based deck. I also knew that there was a big book that had come with the original, but this was hard to get hold of. I got a copy at a really good price, not realising that people were saying it was hard to get hold of, but it was a copy that just came in the tuck box with a little white book. And I think the issue then was that my brain was told, I was told there were a couple of things. Because I knew there was a bigger book with more information, I became a little bit lost with the small book because it wasn't telling me very much. You only get a paragraph. And because I was so reliant on the book, I felt like it wasn't helpful. I also, because of the Thoth RWS thing, wasn't sure what I should expect in terms of how it was going to work. But I haven't got rid of it because I still really, really love the images. Particularly, this is one of my, if I do the top trumps to VR to Masha, musings by Masha, this will be in it as one of my top Empresses. I love that card. I think it is a beautiful, beautiful representation of the Empress to me. Others might disagree, but I really do. I love that this is an actual, you know, oh, I've done it, sorry. I look so much at the cards, I don't look at what's going on up here, apologies. I find the cards are really beautiful. I really, really love them. I mean, that strength card, look at that. The Hermit card is beautiful. I think that's a gorgeous card. And so I find, and even though it's supposedly Thoth based, it still has strength at 8, justice at 11, which I really, really like the imagery in this deck, but I think I stopped working with it because I was like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Again, it was fairly early on. Oh, I need the other book, can't get the other book. And it's just sat there not being used. Interestingly, somehow I discovered that the bigger book is available on Kindle, and I downloaded it. I bought it for a few pounds and it's available. But since doing that, as with the other decks, as I say, time has become harder to come by, and for me it is another deck that requires me to sit down and pay it some attention rather than just getting it out to use. So the decks that I am tending to use will be the decks that I can work with quickly and with very little effort, and decks like this that, even though I've now got the bigger book available, even though I've, you know, loved some of the imagery, this deck is not going to be used because it requires time, it requires thought, it requires care and attention. So it is overlooked, because when I go to my basket and think, oh, I want a different deck today, the decks that I go for will be the ones that I understand and I'm able to work with very little fuss. So that's my 5 tarot decks. The Enchanted Forest, Vivid Journey, Tarot of the Abyss, Anarchy and Gil Tarot. All decks that have cards that I really like, all decks that most of them are decks that I've worked with and enjoyed to an extent, all with slightly different reasons why they are overlooked. But then this issue of the oracles came up for a couple of reasons, as I said before. One of them was because I had them all out on the floor drying off after coffee. Spilt, tsunami, whoops, cloths moved. The other reason was because of the Oracle of Echoes. So when I thought of the Tarot of the Abyss, my instant thinking was of this oracle, which has a pouch I bought online that now stinks of coffee because it got covered in coffee. When Anna released this oracle, I did pre-order it. I have to admit, I've not ordered the tarot, for the simple reason that I am being more discerning. I just can't afford it, and if it's going to come out mass market, I'm going to get the mass market version, to be honest. Unfortunately, I think we've got a little bit of coffee on some of the cards, or it might just be the ink, I don't know, but never mind. I think they're ever so slightly damaged, but hey. So this deck worked with the Tarot of the Abyss, and because I used it for the same reason the Tarot of the Abyss, loads and loads and loads, when I was working with the Tarot of the Abyss the other summer, I haven't used it since. And then I get it out and realise how beautiful these cards are. What's also interesting is that I've seen other decks that I've nearly bought and that I have then not bought because they're so similar. So, yeah. So an oracle that I love but that is overlooked and I haven't worked with for a long time is the Oracle of Echoes. And I think it's because as well I see it in partnership with the Tarot of the Abyss in my head, and therefore my brain goes, well, I can only use it with that and I'm not using that one at the moment. And also it's quite a challenging one. You have to think quite deep with some of them, and I think again I want something that's not too hard for me to get my head around. Another oracle that when I was looking in the box of cards, I was doing some videos the other week, and I keep saying Miss of Avalon. This is one of my favourites. This is my top oracle, but I haven't used it for ages. So it might be one of my favourite oracles, but I haven't used it, and instead I've been looking for other substitutes. I think again because I see this in a pairing with certain decks. Some of the edging has got slightly marred simply because I used it loads. I mean, you can tell that this is a very well used deck because of the edging. And again, I think I overused it, and then because I overused it and because I looked for other things, I haven't used it, and then I've been drawn into buying other Celtic pagan themed decks and goddess decks and things, and realised that actually, well, I've got something here that fits that bill, you know, so why don't I use it? And it's got things like Bridgerton and all these things that I look for in other decks without remembering that actually, well, I looked at the Camelot Oracle the other day. Well, why do I need the Camelot Oracle when I've got these here? Or I looked at, you know, it was second hand, so I was being drawn in. You know, and I have bought another one recently that's similar but actually very different. It's like I look for oracles or goddesses in. Well, they're in here. You know, it's stupid. So yeah, one of my favourite oracles that I've not used, and because I've been too busy, and you know, it hasn't fitted in my head as the one to use at that moment in time. Put the lid on the right way. So that's the Mists of Avalon. I'm just going to put it there to help keep the cloth on the table. Another one you might have spotted a minute ago is this. So this I've mentioned again in a couple of videos. This is my Fairies Oracle. I have very nearly decluttered this a few times. I haven't really worked with this. And the reason is very similar to the reason I gave before. And for this one in particular, it is because in order to work with this deck, I want to study it first. But to study it means having time to sit down with the book. There's stuff in the book around here about, let's just see, touching fairy. It talks about here, it talks about steps into the other world. It talks about looking at the cards. It talks about picking up a card, looking at the back of it. What do you see? So this has very much look at the first card that appeals to you the most, put them in piles. So there's a whole kind of, before you even get to using the cards, work on these things to understand them, to understand the fairies in the cards. So before you even get to the initial cards, you've got this whole chunk of stuff to look at. And so I had every intention of sitting down and working with this deck and understanding it and studying it and then using it with the Labyrinth Tarot. And I haven't, because it requires time and it requires brain power. It requires peace and quiet. And the other week I was doing some decluttering, and this doesn't live in the same box as Coffee Gate box, and I've been going through my decks a lot recently and trying to decide what to do with them, and I wondered whether I should just move it on, but it has too many associations in my head still with the characters I remember from the film Labyrinth, and so in my head I am still thinking that I want to keep it, but that's the image I chose to put on the bag that I had made. But I'm kind of wondering whether it will work for me or not. So yeah, so this one is overlooked because I want to study it. I still think it's one I would use if I could get around to understanding and studying it. Another one, this one, I used the heck out of this deck when I first got it. Oh, did I use it all the time. Unfortunately, this is one that did suffer a teeny bit of coffee damage, but there wasn't a lot I could do. You can't kind of, I may well, I don't know, I may edge the cards to try and hide it, if I edge them in like a really deep blue or something. But unfortunately this I'd done a load of clearing off and then realised that this box was still sat to the side. So yeah. So, oh, did I use this deck? I love this deck. I love these cards. I have to admit I bought another Shan Brat Rose deck, but in her older style than the sort of narrow ones, and I didn't get on with that one as well. And I think it's something about this deck, is particularly the theme or whatever, that really worked for me. I have not bought any of her other decks simply because I don't want to just buy them for the sake of it being her, even though I still really love her artwork. I love the way she creates from the eyes. I love the DNA references in here. This gorgeous kind of, again, it's another one that has images of Celtic goddess and stuff that I forget I've got. So yeah, so another deck in that realm of absolutely adorable, but I use the heck out of it, so I've left it to one side. But one I ought to come back to and use. So another overlooked oracle that I adore, and it isn't going anywhere. The last is a little set. I was just wanted to make it up to 5, and I realised that these 3 I talk about a lot in mini deck videos. I talk about how much I love them. Have I worked with them or picked them up? No, not recently. I sometimes carry them off when I go away. That's about the only time I'll probably pick a card from them. They sit on my desk, buried under a million and one things, and I never think to actually just pull a card from them until I'm doing something like this and go, oh, I'm going to get them out. So these guys I still really like, and I still think they're a really good concept, but I haven't worked with them recently. I haven't done anything with them. I haven't used them. I haven't pulled from them, partly because I'm not here half the time, then the rest of the time I'm just not thinking about it. So I shot through those much more quickly. So that is my response to the most overlooked decks tag that Simon came up with, but also I think other people have done previously. And I have done 5 tarot and 5 oracle, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. And in the meantime, I shall leave it there as I need to go and do some jobs. Take care, everyone. Bye.